Quick disclaimer, this is not a guide. This is a retrospective of me, a 0-2 level ultimate player picking up Rivals 2 framed around dropping to silver and then climbing back up to gold. If you find anything insightful or helpful in this video, fantastic. But more than anything, I just like making videos, it keeps me sane from adulting, and this is a convenient topic to frame a project around. So moving on. The worst mistake I made when I picked up Rivals of Aether 2 was selecting Intermediate when they asked me about my skill level. I was under the grand delusion that being an elite Smash level ultimate player meant I was intermediate, conveniently forgetting how I go 0-2 at almost every single local I go to. Besides being an entirely new game for me to learn with new engines and matchups and stuff, the player base of Rivals 2 is just much more serious. This ain't a Nintendo game where little Timmy gets a copy for Christmas and then dicks around on quick play expecting it to be a children's party game. Which it is, but you get my point. My impression is that everyone who got Rivals 2 on launch are either veterans of some sort of plat fighter like Melee or PM, or come in with the intention of getting good at plat fighters. So like a lot of people, I was in for a rude awakening. But still, I made it to gold, which puts me slightly above average. Just to provide a high-level timeline to frame this video around, Rivals 2 launched on October 23rd. I started playing ranked maybe 1 or 2 days after launch. I hit gold after December 3rd patch dropped, so in those 5 weeks I clocked around 60 to 70 hours of total game time. I mostly played casuals, but by my estimate I played around 25 to 30 sets in ranked. This includes my drop to low mid silver and then my climb back up to gold. Alright. On to the actual gameplay stuff now. Let's talk about my main first. I think from the start I knew I was going to main Loxodon for the long run. In Ultimate, I mained Link for franchise loyalty reasons. However, when I'm not inexplicably shackled to Link for reasons, my preferred archetype were swordies, usually the ones on the slower side, like Byleth. So coming into Rivals 2, it was either going to be Clarin or Lox for me. After playing both in training mode for a bit, I was pretty certain I was going to commit to Loxodon. If I had to describe Loxodon to Ultimate players, his moveset looks a lot like King Dedede with some Pyra and Ganondorf mixed in. However, if we take into consideration with just how Rivals is played in general, Loxodon actually feels more like Corrin. You play neutral by spacing your huge disjoints, but the second you land a hit, grounded or aerial, you just switch into full combo mode. I always struggled playing fast characters, so Lox was good for me since he was just slow enough for me to ease into this faster pace of game. From my first online match to until I hit gold, I played Lox exclusively and did not touch another character at all. But after I hit gold, I did start playing Force Burn, so if you see some Force clips here and there, it's probably for the purpose of demonstrating specific concepts. But solo Lox from launch to gold. After my 4 placement games, I got placed in mid-high silver, and I started free-falling almost immediately. At first, I was content to fall to my true elo and then climb back up from there. However, by the time I was 790 or 780-ish, I started feeling like my brain's elo had already started rebounding, even though my execution was still losing me a lot of games. I started playing against opponents that I knew I was better than, but I just wasn't able to capitalize on it. I see the panic options, I see their approaches, I see their recovery habits. My brain could process everything, but my mechanics just couldn't follow. My movements was just too sloppy, I misjudged my ranges, and I just didn't have enough matchup knowledge to know how to punish them properly. So I went back to casuals. I wanted to dick around and practice in an environment where it was okay to dick around. Plus, being able to rematch an opponent expedites the matchup gaining process a lot. Since matchmaking isn't as strict in casuals than it is in ranked, sometimes I play with the people that just kill me, and I can, learn how to play the game by playing better people. Sometimes I play with weaker players, and I can test the limits of my gameplay by just taking riskier game plans. Every now and then, I would feel a breakthrough, or I just wanted to switch it up and apply everything that I've learned. That's when I hop back into ranked. So eventually that became my rhythm, so to speak. I usually play around an hour a day on weekdays, maybe 1 to 2 hours on weekends, all casuals, but every 3 or 4 days I would feel the itch and I'd jump back into ranked for a few sets to see how I do. There were a lot of mechanical things that I had to learn though. These are the specific things that I focused on first. Surprisingly, wave dashing was not something I struggled with. This is probably because I was a type of idiot in Ultimate to pretend wave dashing was actually a good option, and I did it a lot. The input felt pretty natural, and Rivals wave dashing is pretty lenient in terms of the angles and the timing. Not an issue here for me. offensive options out of dashes and runs. Ultimate lets you mash anything out of everything, and it was a habit I had to break out of. Rivals 2 is not so generous, so a lot of times I ended up buffering a dash attack. In this game, you pretty much have to return to a stationary state before you can jab or tilt. So what I would do is dash, pause, and then press a button. It's a little bit slow, but on Loxodon you can kinda get away with it by just having a massive disjoint. I also ended up learning dash, wave dash, and a jab. I initially used this a lot, but eventually I dialed it back in favor for setting up meatballs and magma instead. More on this later. Plat dropping is something you can't do in Ultimate, but it's pretty crucial in Rivals 2. I struggled with this initially because, from Ultimate, if I'm stuck in a shield on a platform, I don't even look for aggressive options, like shield drop aerial. Like my brain doesn't even register there are ways to get off a platform besides jumping out of shield. There are 4 ways to input a shield drop properly. I tried all 4 ways, and I ended up sticking with probably the worst way, which is to release shield and tap down. All the other methods needed me to have a second shield button or be somewhat accurate with my inputs, neither of which I'm fond of. So the last thing that I'll mention here is the fact that neutral air dodge stalls you in the air. This in itself is not a bad thing, but if you're coming from Ultimate like me, where fast fall neutral air dodge is a legit and viable landing option, this thing is gonna get you killed. So there are actually 2 layers of autopilot I had to overcome with this stalling neutral air dodge. The first one is the aforementioned fast forward neutral air dodge as a landing option, which is not viable in this game, don't do it, just stop doing it. The second autopilot to overcome is you can actually act out of the stall, like you can double jump or you can mash a button. And this can actually bail you out if you do catch yourself slipping a neutral air dodge in disadvantage. My brain just doesn't process that as an option, I don't know why, and I had to learn to overcome that. To wrap up this entire section, I will say this. Even though I haven't applied every single thing that I mentioned before, just by being aware of these options let me stop my elo slide. Before, the game was pretty much all random, where it was hard for me to predict what my opponents will do next, because I don't know what they can do next. But now that I have a better grasp of the basic movement and viable options, I'm starting to see the game as more of a flowchart of options, and in turn steal a bunch of games by knowing where to press big buttons. So one thing that I noticed was I was having a really bad time in disadvantage. One of the tools I often use to try to get out of it is to throw out a hitbox. But then if I want to press a button, I find I'm always in hit stun longer than I anticipate, so mashing doesn't really work. I have to resort to using neutral air dodge or double jump to retreat to ledge. Meanwhile, I also felt like I was approaching the game wrong. Most of my wins came from spacing disjoints to rack up chip damage, and then eventually finding a back air or a smash read to close a stock. Even though this game plan felt kind of correct and I was able to get wins, I feel like I had to play more perfectly because other characters seem to get a lot more mileage out of their advantage stages. At first, I thought maybe this was just a consequence of my character selection, but then when I started considering how I was also having a bad time in disadvantage, it dawned on me. This game just simply has a much stronger advantage state than a disadvantage state. I was simply not playing aggressive enough and I just needed to mash harder. Switching back to Ultimate for a quick second. Playing Byleth and Link, a lot of opponents' game plan was to get past their projectiles or disjoint range and pressure you from close. My natural defensive instinct has always been to immediately disengage if I think I'm in danger. In Ultimate, even if I were in disadvantage, getting reversaled is extremely punishing. Generally, it's preferred to cut advantage states short and settle for stage control or ledge trapping rather than risk overextending. You really have to be selective and disciplined with the buttons you're pressing in Ultimate. But then this isn't Ultimate, this is Rivals 2. In this game, you mash hard and you keep mashing. Shields are weaker in this game and rolls are super punishable. Until this point, I was playing Loxodon like I was playing Byleth, where the game plan was simply to space disjoints all game long and hope I land a killing blow at some point. However, this was when I realized I should be more like Korn, where your disjoints are both combo starters and combo extenders, in addition to being spacing tools. If I land a hit, go in for blood. Even if you have no true combo follow-up, the opponent is unlikely to have an option to immediately reversal on you. Yes, crouch cancelling and floor hugging are strong defensive options, and I'll get into more detail about those defensive options later. Anyways, this really blew my bloody mind and had a very tangible impact to my gameplay. I was getting much more out of advantage state. Even though the aggressiveness was offset by getting hit a bunch more, I felt a legit breakthrough about how Rivals 2 should really be played. Around this time, I also sat down and rewatched all the character overview videos, especially the Orkeen and Maple ones. I had an idea of what they did, but it was clear there was a lot of gimmicky stuff going on. I don't know why I didn't do this earlier, but it really helped me understand the matchups and counterplay better. During this time, I naturally moved up to around 825 or so and stayed there consistently. I stopped dropping below 800s, even on bad days. Up until this point, I was pretty content with just pressing buttons and approaching the game by myself. I didn't really immerse myself in a lot of Rivals content, except watching Gekinga's guide and catching some tournaments. However, I felt like it was time for me to embrace the game. First of all, the Loxodon Discord was finally set up, and I joined that. I started reading what a lot of people were discussing, and it taught me a lot of new concepts that I didn't think about. And on the other hand, it also validated a lot of gut feelings that I had. Here are a few things that I learned from Loxcord. First thing are out of shield options. So Lox doesn't have great out of shield options, but there are a few moves that are unintuitive but surprisingly effective in the right situations. One of them is short hop rising up air. This is a good out of shield option because it hits behind you and it hits low as well. This move can scoop up your Maples and Ranos out of shield, whereas out of shield back air might not. The other good out of shield option is Dare. It's much slower, but it shifts your hurtbox so much that it can counter certain buttons people like to press when you're in shield. This is tricky to use and I'm still misjudging the drift distance and frame data on it. I get punished for whiffing this a lot, but I know Dare is good and I should get good at it. I wouldn't say these two options are necessarily better than the other aerials like out of shield back air or nair or fair or whatever, but they all have the niche and there's a time and place for them. The other takeaway is aerial neutral B or air tusks. I knew this move had a good aerial hitbox, but holy crap, I did not know how good it actually was. It's practically an aerial up smash, and you can wave bounce it as a movement option. I sometimes misinput air tusks because I have Y set to neutral B in the air, and sometimes I fat finger it when I'm jumping. It's really surprising how often it ends up working out better than what I was trying to input in the first place. Moving on, down B confirms. I started trying to learn down B confirms, but this one is pretty tricky and I still don't have it down. I still have trouble getting a sense of the initial eruption hitbox and how to confirm into it, and I'm not even gonna try to attempt to confirm that into a kill. At this point in my journey, I'm just happy enough hitting the eruption itself, and reading DI well enough to hit an aerial follow-up. I'll definitely get to labbing this confirm eventually because this is probably the most reliable kill confirm. So the last thing I'll bring up here is jab or tilt cancelling. There's really not much to mention here, except this is just something the Discord confirms that I need to mix in more. Jab 1-2 and F-tilt 1-2 has its uses, but so does cancelling them into different tilts. F-tilt can be a little scary in general because crouch cancelling can really mess it up. Fortunately, at the level I'm at, people don't CC on reaction yet, so if I don't jab or tilt cancel, I'm just leaving free damage on the table. In conclusion, if the last chapter was about me learning how to play Rivals 2, this chapter is really about me learning how to play Loxodon. I don't think my ranking went up during this period, but I was pretty comfortably hovering around 820 to 850 during this period. Around this time, I also found the Hydra Elo mod. So from here on out until right before I hit gold, I lost track of what the actual number of my ranking was. In general, I'm not too fussy or stressed out over Elo rankings, but I find that when the number is visible, I prioritize winning more than I prioritize getting better, and I like it better when it's not visible. You know how I mentioned way back in chapter 2 about how when my elo was free falling, my brain elo rebounded before my mechanics elo? I was starting to feel my brain climbing and my mechanics stagnating again. Here's what I identified mechanically. Some stuff I was able to adjust to, some stuff I still struggle with, but here's the list. The first category are reaction-based things. My reaction speed is not that fast, and I struggle immensely with pummel breaking. This is especially bad for matchups like Clarin where they'll immediately special pummel every single time. If they hesitate on landing grab, then I have a chance, but if they're fast, then I'm a goner. Sometimes I still have alt autopilot where I try to mash out of grabs, and somehow my autopilot reaction is pretty fast, so I pummel break on occasions just out of pure chance. So I know for sure my reaction speed is there, I just need to teach my brain to identify when I'm getting grabbed a split second sooner. I'm also pretty trash at parrying melee moves. I see you Zetterburns and Clarins doing double jump fast forward dares every single bloody time, but I can never get the timing right. I do think that throwing out a parry here and there, even if it hits or not, discourages people from mashing mindlessly. But maybe it's a bad thing because sometimes I do want them to mash mindlessly, so I can parry it. Either way, parrying melee hits are hard. I can see the move coming a mile away, but I can never get the timing right. Parrying projectiles though, I find it much easier. This is because dirty projectile spammers all share the same brain cell regardless of what game you're playing. I happen to be a dirty projectile spammer in Ultimate, so I can tell when a Zetaburn wants to throw a fireball. I'm only half joking, but it does help that fireballs are the slowest projectile with the biggest windup. The next category of things are defensive options. This ties in a bit with reaction-based things because of crouch cancelling and floor hugging. In Ultimate, getting hit 95% of the time will put you into full-on disadvantage mode. This is not the case in Rivals 2. In fact, it can be to your advantage, pun intended, to get hit, crouch cancelling or floor hugging the hit, and then swing back with a fast button. At first, I thought crouch cancelling and floor hugging were things you do on reaction. It kind of is, but you can also train yourself to just hold down every time you're in hit recovery or do something unsafe. I'm not quite there yet, but something I did start doing is when I'm in a melee tussle and I'm trying to mash out of it, I hold down or roll my stick in a 1-2-3 position and furiously mash a tilt on the C-stick. It's not very precise, but the hope is I can crouch cancel or floor hug and get a hitbox out. I can definitely get better at this, so much more, but at least I'm getting just a bit of intentional mileage out of it. The last category is my game plan with magma charges. This is probably the biggest change I've made that had a tangible impact on my gameplay. I find in Rivals, a lot of characters have some sort of setup that they want to do, like Forceburn with smoke and Loxodon with magma charges. I always knew I needed to stack magma quickly, but I didn't realize how high on my priority list it should be. This coincides around the time when the patch dropped, and it made puddles stick around forever. Both offensively and defensively, I started realizing how much I was getting punished or how much I was leaving on the table for not having magma charges. It's both your win condition as well as get out of jail free card. So I made a concerted effort to max charges as quickly as possible without throwing. To be honest, this habit started because I was trying to practice down B confirms, but I inadvertently realized truly how menacing Loxodon can be while holding max charges. While I was having these reflections about my defensive and offensive game plan, I also started realizing I was maybe mashing a little bit too hard. More like, I wasn't mashing smart enough, or I wasn't mashing optimally. This is the part where I started to dial back on the mashing just a bit and be a little bit more disciplined again. I think this was the final adjustment that got me to gold, but I don't really have much to say about it. It's really just a culmination of everything I've mentioned in this video, but now I'm applying everything more mindfully. When the December 3rd patch dropped, it broke the Hydra Elo mod, and at that point I realized I was at 888 Elo, and from there I went 1 loss and 2 wins, and I got gold. I know that hitting gold basically just puts me ever so slightly above average, according to the rank spreads that get posted on Reddit. I know as I play more, I'll run into better players, and in turn, they'll make me rethink my game plan, and this cycle is going to go on as far and as long as I'm looking to improve. Right now, I'm very clear on a few things that I need to work on though. But ultimately, my only goal going forward is to just play a few more characters and get good enough to stay in gold without dropping out. I like playing this game competitively, but I'm not inherently a competitive person. I don't have any lofty goal I want to achieve like hitting plat or higher or PR at a local. For me, my enjoyment comes from the process of iterative improvement, and there isn't a KPI or metric of success that I'm striving for. It's like how I like getting better at cooking without aiming to be a restaurant quality chef, or I like making videos about video games without aiming to be a content creator. Perhaps this is loser mentality that holds me back in life. If it is, then Loxodon said it best.
You don't deserve